There's something strangely powerful about the person who never posts their photos. No selfies, no vacation highlights, no carefully curated birthday posts. In a world where visibility equals value, they remain quiet. And if you're one of those people, you've probably felt it. That subtle question in the back of your mind, is something wrong with me? Before we answer that, let me ask you something more honest. When you scroll through social media and see everyone documenting their lives, do you feel detached? Or do you feel relieved that you don't have to perform like that? Most people assume that if someone doesn't post their photos, it's insecurity, low confidence, social anxiety, body image issues. And yes, sometimes that's true. But that explanation is shallow. Human behavior is rarely that simple. Because psychology tells us something important. Behavior protects something. And when someone consistently chooses not to show their face online, there's usually a deeper mechanism at work. Here's where it gets interesting. Social media runs on dopamine loops. Every time someone posts a photo, their brain anticipates a reward. Likes, comments, attention, small bursts of validation. Dopamine spikes not just from the reward itself, but from the uncertainty of it. Will people approve? Will they react? Will I be seen? Your brain treats that uncertainty like a slot machine. And the more you post, the more you train your nervous system to seek that loop. But some people are highly sensitive to that shift. They notice how posting changes their internal state. They notice the urge to check notifications, the subtle comparison with others, the mental replay of how they looked. And instead of chasing the loop, they step back from it. That's not weakness, that's awareness. Research on something called self-concept clarity shows that people who have a stable sense of identity rely less on external feedback to define themselves. Their self-worth isn't constantly negotiating with public opinion. They don't need to announce their joy to feel it. They don't need to post a photo to confirm they were there. But that's not even the deepest layer. Because sometimes, not posting is about privacy. Psychologists call it high privacy orientation, a preference for controlling access to your inner world. These individuals aren't antisocial. They simply understand that once something is shared publicly, it's no longer fully yours. Your image becomes interpretation, and interpretation is unpredictable. If you've ever been misunderstood, judged, or subtly criticized growing up, your brain learns something important. Visibility can be risky, so you become selective. You choose depth over display. Let me give you a small story. There's a man named Daniel. He's confident in conversation, calm, observant. People respect him. But online, he barely exists. One day, a friend jokes, "Bro, do you even have a life? You never post anything." Daniel laughs it off, but internally, he knows something. Every time he has posted before, he felt slightly fragmented, like he stepped outside himself and started evaluating how he appeared instead of how he felt. So he stopped. Not because he couldn't post, because he didn't want to split his attention between living and presenting. And this is the part nobody talks about. When you constantly document yourself, you create a subtle psychological divide. You become both the person living the moment and the observer curating it. Over time, that divide can weaken presence. Some people sense that instinctively. They prefer private memories over public metrics. Now let's challenge something cultural. We've been conditioned to equate visibility with confidence. If you're secure, you show up boldly, frequently, publicly. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe real confidence is being unaffected by whether you're seen. Maybe the strongest identity is one that doesn't depend on constant reflection from others. People with anxious attachment styles often seek reassurance through visibility. Posting becomes a way to confirm, do I matter? Avoidant individuals may withdraw entirely, using invisibility as emotional armor. But securely attached individuals, they choose intentionally. They might post or not, and neither choice shakes their foundation. There's also something called internal versus external validation. External validation says, I am worthy because others react positively. Internal validation says, I am worthy regardless. People who don't post their photos often operate from that internal base. And sometimes, they simply understand the digital illusion. Social comparison theory explains that we naturally measure ourselves against others. On social media, you're not comparing full lives. You're comparing highlight reels. Some individuals recognize that distortion and quietly opt out of it. Not because they're above it, but because they value mental clarity. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Choosing not to post means accepting invisibility in a culture obsessed with being seen. That requires emotional stability. It requires being okay with not being constantly acknowledged. And that's rare. If you're someone who rarely posts your photos, maybe you're not insecure. Maybe you're selective with your energy. Maybe you don't want your identity shaped by algorithms. Maybe you prefer real conversations over curated impressions. That's not social awkwardness. That's self-containment. Of course, for some, there is fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of criticism. Fear of not measuring up. And that deserves compassion, not shame. But for many others, the silence is intentional. It's peace over performance. If this resonates with you, you already understand something most people are still learning. You don't need digital proof to validate your existence. You don't need applause to confirm your worth. You don't need to be constantly visible to be deeply valuable. In a world that monetizes attention, there is quiet power in withholding yours. Maybe you're not invisible. Maybe you're simply uninterested in turning your life into content. And that's not insecurity. That's autonomy. If you're someone who thinks deeply about human behavior and identity, you'll feel at home here. Because this isn't about judging those who post. It's about understanding those who don't. You were never behind. You were just becoming without an audience. If this made you see yourself differently, subscribe. And if you've chosen silence in a world that demands visibility, tell me why in the comments.